My name is Komenich, and I'm an assistant professor of new media at San Jose State University. I teach in the School of Journalism and Mass Communications. And I teach everything. I teach how to take pictures. I teach how to shoot video, how to design a website. I teach how to design layouts for the newspaper or a magazine. And on top of that, my graduate students know how to design interactive magazines and newspapers. So, in effect, we're also writing apps at this point. I think there's a couple of levels to this. One of the levels is it's kind of like playing the piano. You know, you learn the chords, or maybe even learning dance, or any creative thing. There's a certain point where you have to learn sort of the structure of your technology that you want to be creative with. So quite often our basic multimedia class, we'd have introduction to Photoshop, also camera skills. So we'd show you how to shoot and compose a great picture. And then within photojournalism, for example, there are different types of pictures that we need every day to put out a newspaper or a magazine. News, of course, but a portrait, sports photos, illustration. Sometimes you'll have to do a conceptual idea and turn that into a still photograph. And portraiture. I think I said, did I say portraiture? Anyway. Yes. Oh, features. That's what I meant to say. Feature photography, which is kind of unplanned things about daily life, just things that a photographer who is out to tell stories. They're walking around, they see something very interesting, and that'll be a great feature picture. So week by week, our students get these assignments, and they go out and go to a news event and cover that from all different angles. We come back, we look at that. Same with the sports, the feature, the portrait, and the illustration. And the idea is that with you kind of going through these paces, you start to build your confidence as a photographer who can solve problems. So in video, it's the same idea. Those types of situations, we start with a very short little movie to do, maybe just to give to me, and then the next one we post on a blog, and then the next one might be a 10-minute piece that we use for an event, or maybe take it to a station or something. One of the things I've found is that people are often very shy, right? Students who are learning this are very happy just staying in there and working on their technology, but they're scared to death to talk to somebody. So one of the things we know about a school of communication is people have to learn to communicate. So one of the hardest things is to suggest that people get out there and talk to strangers. And our students, who are typically 19 to 24, their parents told them to not talk to strangers. So as a professor, this is my problem. Well, when you think about photography as everything photography can do, of course you can imagine things and conceptualize and change things and make the photograph more effective, but it wouldn't be an honest photograph in a newspaper. So if you were to think about the types of photos we can take, either in the documentary world, which is where photojournalism comes from, the idea of a document, right? Something that you can, you think of the word doctor or the word docent in a museum, right? It comes from the Latin to teach, a teacher, right? So documentary photography is teaching photography. So, and journalism comes from that. So the idea of telling a story. And the U.S. Codes of ethics quite often have to do with it had to happen. What I'm seeing in the photograph, number one, it had to happen. The photographer could not have told anybody to do anything. They could not pose them. They could not tell them. They could not move anything around. They could not even move, anything in the photograph. Just what it is, and we photograph it. Well, there's two kinds of photographs in newspapers. If you think of the pictures in the fashion section or the food section, that's illustration. That's not journalism, right? That's another kind of picture that ends up in a newspaper. But if I'm talking really about photojournalism, It has to do with telling a story of, and we always say, real people doing real things, right? And there's no posing, and we're not telling them to be there at a certain time to do this for us. We're going to ask them, when do you do this next? And I will be there. And that's sort of the way we do our photography. Now, the distinctions can be if it's a portrait. I mean, if it's a picture that wouldn't have been made anyway, like somebody who's waiting to have their picture taken as a pose for the paper, again, at that point we can change the time of, whenever the light's best for the picture, for example, would be how we'd handle that. But that's illustration, and what I'm talking about over here is the really, that would be the news pictures, the sports pictures, and those other ones I mentioned that have credibility as, the main reason people believe them is that the newspaper has always told the truth with these kinds of pictures before. So one of the problems with photography is that it's invasive. Like right now, I'm probably holding my stomach in a little bit because a camera is being pointed at me. And I'm usually on the other side of the camera. And my job quite often is to make that person I'm photographing feel comfortable and make them willing to share what they want to share, right? The problem is the more competitive we get, the more likely we are to traumatize the person we are photographing. And I just taught a course this week, as a matter of fact, about that very thing, about the idea of not doing any more harm. Say the person has just been through a tsunami or an earthquake or some other terrible event, right? They have lost control. I always say it's kind of like when you're on the airplane and you get the air bump and everybody goes like this. That moment of loss of control times a day for somebody who's just been in an earthquake. Everything is unsettled. They've lost their ability to control their lives, right? Then I come in with my camera, right? So what I need to do is be very careful about making sure they maintain some control, right? So I ask permission. With your permission, I'd like to take your picture. That way they get to control, and again, in a way it helps, it's therapy. It helps them get better in some ways. And sometimes they say no, and I go away. So again, that creativity and competition over here, there's also empathy and respect, right? And what you have to do in the early stages of a breaking story is respect the fact that the person has lost control, and to help them get better quite often. It's not really my job as a journalist, but because I know these skills, I'm in a position to maybe help do them some good.